A proud billionaire humiliated a waitress in a luxurious restaurant. Her response was so devastating that a deathly silence fell. What escaped her lips forever changed the lives of everyone present. Ricardo Vasquez, adjusting his Italian silk tie, which cost more than most people's monthly salary, examined his reflection in the mirror of the restroom of the city's most exclusive restaurant. At 48 years old, he had built real estate empires that made him one of the richest, but also one of the most hated and despised people in the country. Le Jardin Royal was the ideal place to celebrate his birthday. Marble tables from abroad, crystal chandeliers that cost a fortune, and such an exclusive clientele that a personal recommendation was required for a reservation. It was in such a place that Ricardo felt in his element, surrounded by luxury, that constantly confirmed his sense of superiority. He returned to the main table where his family waited, expressing humility and discomfort. His wife Patricia looked magnificent in a designer dress, but her eyes expressed the fatigue of 20 years of marriage to a man whose ego grew in proportion to the size of his bank account. "Dad, did you really have to rent the entire main hall?" asked his 22-year-old daughter Andrea, who had returned from Europe with a completely different perspective on her father's ostentation. "Of course," Ricardo replied, sitting at the head of the table as if on a throne. "If you're important, you act accordingly. I can't mix with just anyone on my birthday." His youngest son, Diego, 18, exchanged an awkward glance with his sister. For years, they had watched their father treat service staff, workers, and everyone he considered beneath him, and both began to feel ashamed of his behavior. "Ricardo," Patricia whispered softly, "maybe you could be a little calmer tonight? It's a family celebration." "Calmer?" Ricardo laughed a loud laugh that echoed through the hall. "Why should I be calm? I worked to achieve this. If others couldn't, it means they didn't work hard enough." The family had heard this monologue 1,000 times. Ricardo had grown up in poverty, and his financial success had become a way to prove to the world that he was no longer the poor boy who was laughed at in school. But in the process, he had become exactly the kind of person he once hated, one who uses power to humiliate others. The restaurant was specially decorated for the occasion. Each table had exotic flowers from abroad. A live chamber orchestra played music, and the menu was designed by the head chef. It was a display of power and wealth, on which more was spent than many families earn in a year. "Mr. Vasquez," approached the restaurant manager, an elegant man around 50, experienced in dealing with difficult clients. "Everything is ready for service to begin. Our team has been specially selected to serve you tonight." "Excellent," Ricardo nodded with satisfaction. "I expect impeccable service. And when I say impeccable, I mean I will not tolerate the slightest mistake." The manager nervously nodded and withdrew, discreetly signaling the team of waiters waiting in the service area. Everyone had been warned about the client's difficult character and knew that tonight they would have to give their all to avoid problems. In the kitchen, a team of 15 chefs worked with military precision to prepare a 7-course menu specially designed for the evening. Each dish was a culinary masterpiece, and the total cost of the dinner could feed a family for several months. As the Vasquez family waited for service to begin, Ricardo happily looked around. The empty tables in the rest of the restaurant constantly reminded him that he had the financial means to rent the entire establishment for himself and his family. This was precisely the kind of display of power that fed his ego. "You know what the best part about all this is?" Ricardo said to his family, pointing to the empty hall. "There are hundreds of people in this city who would give anything to be in my place, but they never will be, because they don't have what it takes to be successful." Andrea was disgusted by her father's words. In Europe, she had met truly successful people who were also humble and generous. She learned that true wealth is measured not only by money, but also by how you treat others and what positive impact you have on the world. "Dad," Andrea gently tried to object, "don't you think you could use your success to help others and not just flaunt it?" Ricardo looked at her as if she had said something utterly ridiculous. Andrea, your European teachers have clearly filled your head with foolish ideas. The world is a place of competition. If you help others too much, they become dependent and you become weak. But, Dad, there are studies that prove that the most successful companies are those that treat their employees better and make a positive contribution to society. Diego interjected, supporting his sister. Studies? Ricardo scoffed. Do you know what studies are, Diego? They're what people who don't have real success do to justify their failure. I don't need studies. My results speak for themselves. Patricia watched the conversation with growing discomfort. For many years, she had tried to soften her husband's behavior, especially in public. But Ricardo seemed unable to control his urge to demonstrate superiority over others. At that moment, the service doors opened, and a team of waiters appeared, led by a young woman who immediately attracted the attention of the entire table. She was about 25 years old. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and her presence exuded professionalism and natural dignity. She approached the table confidently, radiating an elegance that sharply contrasted with her uniform. There was something in her eyes, a deep intelligence and calmness that Ricardo couldn't help but notice, though he didn't give it much thought at the time. "Good evening," she said in a clear, professional voice. "My name is Isabel Morales, and I will be your head waitress this evening. It is an honor to serve you on this special day." Her Spanish was impeccable, but her intonation suggested confidence in knowing other languages as well. Her posture was refined, and her manner of speaking was sophisticated, which seemed inconsistent with her current position. "Excellent," Ricardo replied, without even looking at her, already perusing the menu. "I expect exceptional service, and when I say exceptional, I mean no mistakes." Isabel nodded professionally, but Andrea noticed something in her eyes. It was not fear or submission, as one might expect from an intimidated employee. It was something akin to compassion, as if she fully understood the kind of person Ricardo was and pitied him. "Of course, Mr. Vasquez, we have specially prepared every detail to make this evening unforgettable," Isabel responded with a cool confidence that sharply contrasted with Ricardo's increasing arrogance. As she began to describe the special menu and wine pairing options, Ricardo abruptly interrupted her. "How long have you been working here?" he asked in a tone more interrogative than friendly. 3 months, sir," Isabel replied calmly. "And before that? Were you also a waitress?" he continued in a tone clearly intended to assert his authority. Isabel paused for a barely perceptible moment before answering. "I have worked in the service industry for some time, sir. My priority has always been to provide the best service to every client." It was a diplomatic answer, revealing nothing personal but preserving her dignity. However, Ricardo interpreted her professionalism as an opportunity to demonstrate his power. "Good," he leaned back in his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Do you know how important it is to keep important clients happy?" "All our clients are important, Mr. Vasquez," Isabel replied with a smile that could be called professional, but with a slight playfulness that Ricardo didn't immediately notice. The Vasquez family watched this dialogue with growing discomfort. Andrea and Diego exchanged glances full of shame for their father's behavior, while Patricia stared intently into her water glass, as if wishing to become invisible. While Isabel took the drink order, Ricardo didn't let up. Each of his remarks clearly aimed to remind the waitress of her place in the social hierarchy, but Isabel handled each of his jibes with such professional grace that it began to irritate Ricardo. He was accustomed to service staff displaying clear subservience and even fear. However, Isabel maintained a calm dignity that could not be broken by his arrogance. What Ricardo didn't know was that Isabel Morales carried secrets that would surprise anyone at that table. Her presence in the restaurant was not accidental, and her calm in the face of his arrogance had reasons he couldn't even imagine in his worst nightmares. The evening progressed, and as the first course was served, Ricardo felt a strange desire to break Isabel's professional composure. Her natural dignity seemed a personal challenge to his authority, and this desire to dominate someone who refused to be afraid was precisely what set in motion a chain of events that would change everything forever. The first course was served with balletic precision, medallions of foie gras with a 15-year-old wine or port sauce. Isabel moved gracefully around the table, serving each dish with a technique that indicated experience and professional training. Ricardo watched her every move carefully, trying to find even one mistake to assert his authority, but Isabel was flawless. It was clear that she had been trained in high-class service. She knew exactly how to serve from the left, how to hold the tray, and how never to completely turn her back on the guests. "Where did you learn to serve like that?" Ricardo asked sharply, interrupting Andrea's conversation about her recent trip to Paris. Isabel finished serving Patricia's dish and replied, "Experience teaches a lot, Mr. Vasquez." This was another diplomatic answer, but Ricardo perceived it as evasive. His ego, inflated by the evening's ostentatious luxury, could not tolerate someone he considered inferior not giving direct answers. "I didn't ask about experience." Ricardo raised his voice, making it threatening. "I asked specifically, where did you study? Is your speech so difficult for a precise answer?" The tone changed instantly. The Vasquez family visibly tensed. Patricia stopped chewing. Andrea froze in her chair, and Diego looked down at his plate, experiencing the familiar family shame. But Isabel showed no fear. She remained with a straight posture and a calm voice. "I have studied in several places over the years, sir. Each restaurant has its own standards and techniques." "Several places?" Ricardo leaned forward, like a predator sensing weakness. "So you were fired from other jobs. That's why you're here. Because no one else would hire you." The silence that followed was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Other waiters nearby paused for a moment, sensing the tension emanating from the main table. "Dad," Andrea whispered, her voice full of pleading. "Quiet, Andrea," Ricardo interrupted her sharply, without even looking. "I'm talking to the girl. What's your name?" "Isabel Morales, sir," she replied with unwavering composure. "Isabel Morales," Ricardo repeated mockingly. "Tell me, what is your education? Did you finish high school?" The question was uttered with such clear cruelty that Diego felt sick. He had seen his father humiliate employees, but he had never witnessed such open and malicious taunting. For the first time that evening, Isabel looked Ricardo directly in the eyes, and something passed between them for a moment. In those dark eyes there was neither fear nor submission. There was something he couldn't understand immediately, but it deeply disturbed him. "I finished high school, yes, sir," Isabel replied, and continued her studies afterward. "How exactly?" Ricardo laughed a cruel laugh that echoed through the hall. "What exactly did you study? Half-year culinary courses, technical programs for waitresses?" Patricia finally found her voice. "Ricardo, this is unacceptable. Leave her alone." "Unacceptable?" He turned to his wife with burning eyes. "Is it unacceptable that I, as a client, have the right to ask questions of the staff who serve us? It's not a question of anything." "But how?" Andrea interjected. Her voice trembled with suppressed indignation. "You're treating her like she's less than human." "She's not less than human," Ricardo exploded, hitting the table with such force that the dishes clattered. "But she's not equal to us either. There are social differences, and everyone needs to understand their place." The entire restaurant plunged into a deathly silence. The other patrons, though in the bar area not rented for the party, clearly heard what was happening. The manager watched from a distance with a panicked expression, clearly deciding whether or not to intervene. Isabel remained motionless throughout Ricardo's outburst. When he finished shouting, she spoke in such a calm voice that it sharply contrasted with his outburst. "May I continue serving dinner, Mr. Vasquez, or would you prefer a different waiter to be called?" The question was posed with such professionalism that Ricardo's loss of control looked even more pathetic. It was obvious that Isabel had excellent self-control, which he had completely lost. "No," Ricardo replied, his voice still tense with anger. "You will continue to serve us, But remember who is paying your salary today. Of course, sir, Isabel nodded. I can offer you a selection of wines for the second course. While Isabel briefly went to retrieve the wine list, the Vasquez family fell into a tense and embarrassed silence. Patricia quietly but firmly said, "You're behaving like a monster." Monster? Ricardo turned to her in astonishment. I'm just setting appropriate boundaries. I'm not allowing an employee to be disrespectful. She wasn't disrespectful, Andrea exploded, unable to bear it any longer. She was absolutely professional. You're just being cruel for no reason. Andrea's right, Dad, Diego joined in, supporting his sister. You're publicly humiliating her, and she's done nothing to deserve it. Ricardo looked at his family with a genuine expression of betrayal. In his distorted mind, he was the patriarch who deserved unconditional support, especially when his authority was questioned. Are you seriously taking the side of a stranger against your own father? He asked with pain and indignation in his voice. We're not taking sides, Patricia replied wearily. We're pointing out behavior that is objectively cruel. At that moment, Isabel returned with the wine list, seemingly oblivious to the tension that had flared in her absence. Or, as Andrea suspected, she was perceptive enough to understand everything, but professional enough to ignore it. For the second course, which will be sea bass with saffron sauce, Isabel began, we recommend an Albarino from Rias Baixas from the 2018 vintage. Or, if you prefer something richer, we have a Verdejo from Rueda, which pairs beautifully with seafood. Her knowledge of wine was evident, and her description of each option demonstrated a refined taste that did not fit the stereotypical image of a simple waitress in Ricardo's mind. How do you know so much about wines? He asked, but now his tone held genuine curiosity, mixed with his usual hostility. Part of my job is to know our selection well, to make appropriate recommendations, Isabel replied. Have you tried these wines? Ricardo pressed. Or are you just repeating what you've been told? Isabel hesitated for a moment. The pause lasted only a second, but Andrea noticed it. It seemed she was deciding how much truth to reveal. I've had the opportunity to try most of our wines, she finally replied. Opportunity? Ricardo scoffed. What does that mean? Do they give you free samples as part of your training? Something like that, Isabel replied, maintaining her professionalism. But Ricardo sensed that there was something in her answer that could not be ignored. His instinct for recognizing secrets, which had made him successful in business, told him that Isabel had a hidden story. You know, he leaned back in his chair with a malicious smile. I think you're lying to us. I think you're exactly what you seem. A girl who couldn't achieve anything better than serving dishes, and now you're trying to impress us with false knowledge. Enough, Ricardo, Patricia shouted, but he ignored her. Moreover, he continued, sounding increasingly angry, I'm willing to bet you don't even know the difference between Merlot and Malbec. You're just repeating words you've heard. Isabel looked at Ricardo for a long time, and Andrea swore she saw a change in her eyes. It wasn't anger or resentment, it was more like compassion. Mr. Vasquez, she finally said, would you like me to choose the wine based on my recommendations, or would you prefer to choose yourself? This was another perfectly professional answer, avoiding direct conflict, but making Ricardo's behavior seem childish in the face of her composure. You choose, Ricardo, she said with a mischievous smile. I want to see if you really know what you're talking about, or if you're just another liar trying to seem smarter than you are. Isabel nodded and headed to the wine cellar. While she was gone, Diego leaned over to his father. Dad, why are you doing this? She hasn't insulted you in the slightest. Because, Diego, Ricardo replied, as if teaching an important lesson. People need to understand the social hierarchy. When you allow someone from a lower class to act as an equal, you undermine your authority. Lower class? Andrea repeated in horror. I'm listening to myself just fine, Ricardo replied firmly. And what I'm hearing is a successful man who won't let himself be intimidated by employees who don't know their place. Isabel returned with a bottle that Ricardo didn't immediately recognize. It was clearly expensive, but he wasn't a wine expert, despite claiming to be one. "I've chosen a Godello from Valdeorras, 2017 vintage," Isabel explained, opening the bottle with practiced movements. "It's a less-known grape variety than Albarino, but it has a complex minerality that beautifully complements the delicate sea bass without overpowering the saffron." She poured Ricardo a small sip, which he tasted with a skeptical expression. To his annoyance, he had to admit, "The wine is excellent." "How much does this bottle cost?" he asked, looking for a new line of attack. €350, Isabel replied without hesitation. Ricardo almost choked on his wine. That was more than many earned in a month. And this simple waitress had accidentally chosen one of the most expensive bottles on the menu. "And you decided to choose the most expensive bottle, thinking I'm a fool?" Ricardo's voice dropped to a dangerously low tone. "I chose it because it's the best fit for this pairing," Isabel said calmly. "But if you prefer something cheaper, I can bring another option." "No," Ricardo quickly replied. His ego wouldn't allow him to show that he was thinking about money. "All right, but I hope it's worth every penny." As Isabel poured the wine for the rest of the family, Ricardo realized that with every word she spoke, he felt less and less in control of the situation, no longer in control. It seemed she had some silent power that he couldn't break, and it infuriated him more than anything in years. What he didn't know was that Isabel Morales held secrets that would make his attempts at humiliation not just cruel, but utterly absurd. And the night was just beginning. The second course was served with Swiss clockwork precision. Sea bass, perfectly cooked on a bed of saffron risotto, with seasonal vegetables cut with geometric accuracy. Isabel served each dish with the same unwavering elegance she had all night, as if impervious to Ricardo's escalating hostility. But Ricardo had crossed an invisible line in his mind. Isabel's wine choice, her obvious knowledge, her refusal to be intimidated, all of it had bruised his ego so badly that he couldn't bear it. In his distorted world, any display of competence from someone he considered inferior was a personal insult that demanded punishment. "Isabel!" Ricardo called out as she was about to withdraw, leaving the family to enjoy their meal. His voice had changed, becoming more calculated, more cruel. "Yes, Mr. Vasquez," Isabel replied, turning with the same professionalism. "Stay here for a minute. I want to ask you a couple of questions." Patricia briefly closed her eyes, recognizing that tone. It was the same one Ricardo used in business meetings when he was about to destroy a competitor. Andrea and Diego exchanged increasingly worried glances. "How may I help you, sir?" Isabel asked, standing confidently, her hands professionally clasped in front of her. "Tell me," Ricardo began, cutting a piece of sea bass without looking at her, as if she were too insignificant to merit a full glance. "How much do you earn here?" The question dropped onto the table like a bomb. It was a clear invasion of personal space, and the whole family tensed. "Dad!" Andrea whispered insistently. "You can't ask that." "Why not?" Ricardo looked up, feigning innocence. "It's a legitimate question. I'm deciding whether to give a generous tip, and I need to understand what amount would be appropriate." This was an obvious lie, and everyone at the table knew it. Ricardo had no intention of being generous. He was looking for another way to assert his superiority. Isabel was silent for a second, clearly deliberating how to answer such an inappropriate question. "My income is a personal matter, Mr. Vasquez, but I assure you any tip would be greatly appreciated," she finally replied. "Personal?" Ricardo laughed. The laugh rang like breaking glass. "Personal, dear. When you work as a waitress, your salary is not a state secret." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anger. "I'll tell you what I think. I think you earn about $1,000 a month, if you're lucky. That means that for a whole year, working like a slave, you barely earn what I spend on a dinner like this." The silence around them was so thick it seemed it could be weighed. The waiters around froze, and even the sounds from the kitchen subsided. "Do you know how much it costs to rent this hall for today?" Ricardo continued, growing angrier with each word. $30,000 just for the rent. That's not including the food, wine, decorations, orchestra. In total, this dinner is costing me about $40,000. Isabel listened without visible reaction, but Andrea saw her posture change. She was preparing for something. 40,000, Ricardo repeated, savoring the words like an expensive wine. That's more than you earn in 3 years. Do you understand the difference between us? Do you understand why it's foolish to pretend you're my equal? Ricardo, Patricia pleaded. Her voice trembled with shame. That's too much. No, Ricardo replied, looking at his wife with blazing eyes. It's not enough. This girl needs to understand how the world works. She needs to understand that there are people like us and people like her, and trying to argue against that is not funny. He turned back to Isabel, who had remained motionless all this time. Do you know what irritates me most about you? He asked, standing up abruptly. The movement was so sudden that Patricia jumped in her chair. Sir, I don't understand, Isabel replied calmly. What irritates me, Ricardo enunciated, walking around the table, is your manner, as if you're too good for this job, as if you're here on loan, not earning a living. Honestly, he stood directly in front of Isabel, using his height to intimidate, but she did not take a single step back and did not lower her gaze. I have great respect for my work, Mr. Vasquez, she said. Her voice did not tremble despite the aggressive proximity. Ah, Ricardo said mockingly. You respect carrying dishes? You respect cleaning up after successful people? You respect living on tips from people like me? I respect honest labor, Isabel replied. And for the first time that night, there was a sharpness in her voice that hadn't been there before. These words awakened something deep in Ricardo, his personal history. A poor childhood, years of humiliation before he became rich. But instead of evoking compassion, Isabel's answer only fueled his anger. Honest labor, he exploded. As if you have a choice, as if you chose this job because it's noble, and not because it's the only thing you could do. Diego suddenly stood up. Enough, Dad. You're acting like a lunatic. Sit down, Ricardo roared at his son. Don't interfere in adult conversations. I am an adult, Diego shouted back. And as an adult, I'm telling you, you're acting like a cruel bully. The confrontation between father and son made the other patrons in the bar turn toward the main table. The manager finally approached them, clearly agonizing over whether or not to intervene. Isabel took advantage of the moment and took a step back, but Ricardo immediately noticed. Don't move, he commanded in a cold voice that made Patricia shudder. I'm not finished with you, Mr. Vasquez, Isabel said with a clearly altered tone. It was still professional, but it had lost its submissiveness. I think it would be better if another staff member continued the service. Better for whom? Ricardo asked cautiously. For you, because you don't want to accept the reality of who you are. Better for everyone, Isabel replied, looking him directly in the eyes. The implication that he needed protection from himself fueled his ego. At that moment, Ricardo completely lost his mind. You know what? He moved even closer, completely invading her personal space. I think you could use a lesson in humility. I think you've been trying to appear as something you're not for too long. Ricardo! Patricia also stood up. Her voice trembled. Immediately, or I'll call security. Security? Ricardo laughed hysterically. To protect a waitress who doesn't know her place? He turned to Isabel with a smile devoid of humor. Tell me, Isabel, have you ever been to a place like this as a client? Never, sir. Have you ever flown first class? Owned a car worth over $100,000? Lived in a house with more than 10 rooms? No, sir, Isabel repeated, remaining calm. Then why are you acting as if you're my equal? Ricardo shouted. His voice echoed through the entire restaurant. Why do you refuse to show the respect due to someone who is clearly superior in every way? At that moment, the manager finally approached the table. His face was pale with panic. "Mr. Vasquez," he began nervously, "is there a problem we can resolve?" "The only problem," Ricardo turned to the manager, without looking away from pointing at Isabel, "is that your employee doesn't understand how to treat important clients." The manager looked between him and Isabel, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Ms. Isabel is one of our best waitresses. If something specific is bothering you—" "Her attitude bothers me," Ricardo interrupted. "Her refusal to show proper deference, her behavior as if she's too good for the job." Isabel finally spoke, addressing the manager. "Mr. Morrison, I have tried to maintain professionalism all night. If Mr. Vasquez prefers another waiter, I am ready to hand over my duties." "No!" Ricardo shouted. "You won't get off that easy. You'll stay here and learn what real respect is." At that moment, Ricardo made a mistake that would change everything forever. He moved even closer to Isabel, completely invading her personal space, and with a voice full of contempt, he spoke the words that would determine his fate. "You're just a pathetic waitress who will never be anything more in this life. It's time for you to accept that." The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones. It wasn't a tense or awkward silence. It was the calm before the storm. Isabel looked at Ricardo for a long time, and something changed in her eyes. The professional patience, understanding, and compassion she had shown all night vanished in an instant. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but possessed such power that everyone in the restaurant involuntarily leaned forward to listen. "Mr. Vasquez," Isabel said, "I think it's time to talk differently." And with those words, Ricardo Vasquez's world was about to collapse forever. The silence in the restaurant was so absolute that the ticking of an antique clock on the wall could be heard. Isabel remained motionless in front of Ricardo, but a fundamental change had occurred in her presence. She was no longer a professional waitress trying to maintain peace. Now, her posture held a power Ricardo had never seen, and a dignity that was beyond his insults. "Mr. Vasquez," Isabel began clearly and firmly, "all night you have tried to prove your superiority based on money. Allow me to ask you something." Ricardo blinked, surprised by the change in tone. All night he had been attacking, and now Isabel suddenly took control of the conversation. "How exactly did you get rich?" Isabel asked, tilting her head slightly as if genuinely interested. "What?" Ricardo mumbled in confusion. "Your fortune," Isabel continued calmly. "How did you build it? What exactly did you do to become the successful person you consider yourself to be?" Ricardo straightened up, regaining some of his arrogance. "I worked hard, had business vision, high intelligence, things you clearly don't understand." "Worked hard," Isabel repeated, and there was something in her tone that made Patricia straighten in her chair. "What kind of work exactly?" she asked. "I built real estate empires from scratch," Ricardo replied, puffing out his chest. "I bought land when no one saw its potential. I developed projects that changed the city." "Interesting," Isabel nodded. "And the land you bought, did you buy it at a fair market price?" The question seemed innocent, but the way it was asked made Diego frown. It seemed Isabel knew something specific. "Of course," Ricardo replied, but in a noticeably defensive tone. "Even the land in the San Jose area." "Mr. Vasquez?" Isabel asked quietly. "When families tried to legally fight against the expropriation, did you hire lawyers to drag out the process until they ran out of money?" All color drained from Ricardo's face. The San Jose area was the project that had catapulted him to the top, transforming him from a successful businessman into a billionaire. But the details of that deal he had carefully concealed. The entire restaurant was now watching intently. Patrons in the bar stopped pretending not to. "I have corrected spelling, punctuation, and grammatical errors, and also improved sentence structure and word choice for better readability.